Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. This is a new video tutorial series of my GameLift with Blueprints plugin. In this video tutorial series I will teach you how GameLift works and how to use my GameLift with Blueprint plugin. And alright, so let's go ahead and start talking about global service and matchmaking. When we play an online game, latency is what we care about the most. High latency will cause a lot of problems, including lag and aim problem, especially for shooting games. There are some lag compensation algorithms, but if we can reduce latency itself, it helps much more than any lag compensation algorithm. Technologically, latency is mainly increased by NATs. The more layers of NAT you have between you and your Connect target, the more latency you will have. The distance of transform is ignorable. To reduce the latency for every player, the most effective way is to set up servers next to the root NAT of all regions. So we want to create fleet instances in all regions so that players in all regions have their own fleet and have low latencies. To create fleet instances in all regions, there are two methods now. The first one is use the location feature of the fleet and enable as many locations as we can when we create a fleet. When we need to call GameLift nodes to a fleet, we need to specify which location we want to call to. The second option is just switch the region in AWS Web Console and create fleets in all regions. We need to create GameLift client objects for each region we have set up in the GameLift services in our project. Now, we have our fleet instances in many regions, but in order to connect players to the fleet instances that they are close to, we need to know where the player is. In other words, we need to choose fleet instances for the player based on his latency or for a group of player base on their latency. In order to do that, we use GameLift Queue service with fleets in multiple regions. Setting up multiple locations in a fleet won't work for now, but may work in the future. We use GameLift Queue service to place a game session. So, the request to GameLift Queue service is Game Session Placement Request. Game Session Placement Request is a long-term request. We call Start Game Session Placement to find a Game Session Placement request, and we need to call Describe Game Session Placement periodically to check if the Game Session Placement is finished or not, and if it is successful or not. And we can call Stop Game Session Placement before a Game Session Placement request finish in order to cancel it. When we set up GameLift Queue service, we need to tell GameLift Queue service your player latency policies, including how long should it be before the game session placement request should be timed out? How much time do you want to spend to find a region or destination that all players in the request have latencies less than a specified time? Which regions and which fleet or alias should the game session be created in? When a player or a group of players send a Start Game Session Placement request to GameLift Queue, latencies to all regions set in GameLift Queue of all players should be included. Then, GameLift Queue will spend the time to find a region that all players have latencies less than the time you specified, or will fail with timeout if it can't find any. If GameLift Queue get a region, it will try to create game session in the fleet you specified as destination, which is in the region GameLift Queue get. If the game session fails to create, GameLift Queue will try another fleet in the same region and keep trying the next fleets until its success or times out. Once it creates the game session successfully, it will create the player sessions for all players listed in the game session placement request in the game session as well. We just need to make sure we have accepted the player session when the player joined the game server process. After it's finished successfully, game session will be returned in the next Describe Game Session Placement call with fulfilled status. Matchmaking service is similar with GameLift Queue. Matchmaking request is a long-term request as well. We need to call Start Matchmaking to start a matchmaking request and call Describe Matchmaking periodically to check if the matchmaking request finished or not and if it's successful or not. To cancel a matchmaking request, we need to call Stop Matchmaking. We need to prepare a matchmaking rule set before we set up matchmaking. AWS GameLift Matchmaking Rule Set is a JSON document that describes how matchmaking service should perform the matchmaking. You can go to AWS Document to learn how to design your own rule set. AWS Document also provides some rule set examples for you to learn how to write it. So I won't be teaching how to design a rule set in this video tutorial. When a player or a group of players start a matchmaking request, GameLift Matchmaking Service will treat all players in a matchmaking request as a team, unless there are more players than a team maximum player number. Then it will split you and your friends. If you start a matchmaking request with a friend amount less than the minimum player number, matchmaking will fill your team with other matchmaking requests until it reaches the minimum player number, and dev can choose to let matchmaking service keep filling it until maximum with automatic backfill service or not. Then, GameLift Matchmaking Service will pair teams with the rule set we configure. After matchmaking finished pairing players and teams, matchmaking can start placing the game session with the queue devs configure in matchmaking configuration. So, we need to provide players' latencies as well in start matchmaking request if we set up matchmaking configuration with a GameLift queue. Once game session placement is finished, describe matchmaking request will return with complete status and the placed game session info. There is one more thing that we need to concern about when we use GameLift matchmaking service. Not all GameLift regions support matchmaking. What we need to do is choose one or some regions that support matchmaking and set up matchmaking in queue init, then let the queue connect some regions' fleets. For example, you can set up matchmaking in queue in US East 1, AP Northeast 1, and then set the queue in US East 1's destination to fleets in US East 1, US East 2, US West 1, US West 2, and the queue in AP Northeast 1's destination to fleets in AP Northeast 1, AP Northeast 2, AP Southeast 1, AP Southeast 2. And use multiple GameLift client objects in client to call APIs in different regions. AWS Backfill Service is an extension service of matchmaking service. It's a long-term service too. But unlike queue and matchmaking, start backfill request, describe backfill request, and stop backfill request can be sent from server. But from client, you can only start a backfill request. Backfill is used to fill players into teams that didn't reach the maximum number of players. Each backfill request will only match with a matchmaking request. You can let matchmaking do it automatically for you, but matchmaking will only start backfill for the empty player slots at the beginning. Which means if there is someone that left the match, it won't fill in this slot. When a server starts a backfill, the server needs to tell backfill service which matchmaking configuration it's based on and how many teams and how many players in each team. Backfill will start looking for matchmaking requests that can fill in the empty slots for each team. Each backfill request will be matched with a matchmaking request. So, most of the time, we need to start backfill requests multiple times to fill in all empty slots for all teams. And we need to wait until the previous backfill request finished before we start a new backfill request. That's all. Thank you all for watching.